Initiation by Robert Hugh Benson. Part 2, Chapter 7, Part 2. Subsection 4. It seemed to Aunt Anna, as Mrs. Bessington talked, that she was watching, so to say, an extraordinarily fine portrait being painted with the trembling, uncertain strokes of a completely incompetent artist. Yet the artist was infinitely pathetic too, for the first time Aunt Anna perceived, beneath the senseless trickle of words and the set conventional face, not only a humanity which she had never suspected, but a humanity that was in anguish and had, with a stoical kind of courage, succeeded hitherto in hiding its pain under this flat and dreary exterior. Again and again, as the middle-aged woman talked, interrupting herself, wandering away into parentheses that never closed, describing details minutely, and omitting principles, the other was drawn off in a kind of wonder from the repellent vision of Enid revealed by her mother to the poignant vision of the mother as tormented by Enid. For the first time in her life, Anna stood face to face with a figure of sorrow that was almost grotesquely dull, with a soul that was suffering intolerable pain under a flat and foolish mask. When the woman had finished, she had tailed off into wholly inconsequent repetitions and comments, Anna understood as she had never thought to understand. The beautiful girl, then, was a practically insane egoist. She had been so the whole of her life long. Obviously, she had been spoiled as a child. Her father had done the most of it, and her mother had yielded. She cared really for absolutely no one except herself. One or two almost incredible little stories were related as to the way she had treated her friends. For now she had no friends at all. Her beauty and her charm drew people to her again and again, and for a week, or a month, or even 6 months, such friendships had developed. Always, however, sooner or later, she behaved exactly as she had behaved to Neville. Once before she had been engaged to be married, and had broken it off in almost a precisely similar manner. Yet she always considered herself the innocent party. She always professed herself disappointed in her friends. She had begun, for the last year or two, to withdraw herself in a kind of despair from people's company, since she appeared honestly to be under the impression that it was these alienated friends who had behaved badly to herself. But above all, it was in her behaviour to her mother that the egoism showed itself most cruelly of all. She insisted on going these rounds. She insisted on living in what she considered a suitable manner, on having rooms in these hotels, on expensive isolation, on continual travelling. Yet, in private, she behaved to her mother with unrelenting cruelty. She continually told her not to talk so much. She reproached her. She sulked for days together in silence. She used her tongue like a whip. Yet in public, she bore herself with dignity and serenity, and even with a superficial kind of affection. Nerves, no doubt, were responsible for such outbursts as that which Neville had experienced. But the outbursts did no more than reveal that insanely selfish character which, beneath her calm and apparent detachment, brooded always within her. Such, then, was the portrait indicated rather than executed by the woman in the black mantle and bonnet. The portrait that grew upon the air before Anna's eyes, and solved her last difficulties. For every line brought conviction, the jealousy she had suspected in her, the little flickers of abruptness, the sense of which she was aware that this was the very last girl in the world for Neville. The broken little story which he himself had told. These things all fell into place and joined on with the lines of the character which the girl's mother herself now filled up. "I could keep it to myself no longer, Mrs. Fanning," said the poor lady, trembling a little, with a large tear in the corner of each eye. "I feel you have a right to know. God forgive me if I am hard upon my own daughter. God knows how I have tried to think otherwise, but as I have said,
She behaves like that both to me and to others, ever since she was a little dot. She is very selfish. I am afraid there is no doubt about that, and thinks of no one but herself. And then she begins to find fault with the first one and then another, until there is no one left."
Mrs. Bessington was repeating herself gallantly, without the least misgiving.
"And it has always been so from the first. She used to be the same with her father, too, who, well, he had made his own way in the world, you know, and she did not like the way he used to pronounce words sometimes, and used to say so to him when we were alone together. But now I must bear with it as well as I can, because I am her mother, and I have never yet said a word to anyone except yourself. But as soon as your note came, and I could see what terrible harm she had done once more, I just slipped on my things and came away, and left a note saying that I was called away. She has shut herself up in her room ever since yesterday, and has never touched a morsel of food. But I did hope that this time would be the last, and that she had at last found in Sir Neville the very man for her. And I am sure I do not know what we shall do next, or whether she will speak to me again for a while, for she is sure to say that it was all my fault for talking as much. And whatever will you think of me, Mrs. Fanning, for talking like that about my own—"
The 2 tears rolled suddenly from her eyes, and fell on the black silk mantle. Aunt Anna sprang up and kissed her. Subsection 5. At 7:30, Aunt Anna stood at the door, watching the back of the carriage that took her guest off to the station. Mrs. Bessington's conversation, at the early dinner that was served for her in the morning room at 7 o'clock, had been a very masterpiece. Without the smallest softening again of that cast-iron exterior of conventionality, she had discoursed with amazing courage of the Academy exhibition, and Selva's acting, the comparative merits of English and Italian scene painters, the dust on the roads, and her country cottage to which, she remarked unblenchingly in Masterson's presence, she supposed that Enid and herself would soon be going. In its way, it was the most gallant exhibition that Anna had ever witnessed. A quarter of an hour ago in the garden, the mask had been laid aside, and she had seen a woman whose heart must have been very nearly broken by the most unromantic and sordid pain that any woman can suffer. A pain that went on ceaselessly. The continual contempt and cruel hostility of her own daughter. And now, here again sat the original Mrs. Bessington, as Masterson came in and out, with her features composed again into their smiling cast, and not one spark of feeling visible in her eyes, dining well and amply before returning to London to take up the torment again. Meanwhile, Anna had considered, in gusts of thought, what she must do when the other was gone. She had again peeped into Neville's room, and he was still lying on his bed, apparently asleep. But what must be done when the guest was gone? She had decided not to tell him that she was here till afterwards. There was no purpose to be served. The thing was finished. Not for any consideration in the world, even had such a thing been possible, would Anna have lifted a finger to mend the breach. She thanked God, only that the matter had been ended, at however dreadful a cost, before it was irredeemable. Here, then, she stood now, with the western sun in her eyes, watching the broughams back diminish in the distance as, with Jim and the collies so short a while ago, she had seen Neville's car go down the drive. Masterson had gone back into the house, and she was alone. She appeared to herself to be in a strange kind of lull. Just as the poor soul there in the brougham was driving away to face so gallantly one kind of pain, so she, when she turned again into the house behind her, must face another. There seemed a lot of pain everywhere, and all so purposeless. It seemed a miserable sort of affair, that so much unhappiness could be caused by one person. Then, as she stared at nothing, for the brougham was gone, she began to realize that her attitude towards pain was not as it used to be, not even as so short a while ago as a few weeks. It was no longer to be feared, as once she had feared it, especially that subtle and exquisite kind that arises from watching that of another. There was not that thrill of terror which she would have felt a while ago, as she contemplated in her imagination what she must now witness in Neville, that dreadful, helpless simplicity as of a child. She had no idea of what would happen next, of how she would find him. He must have slept now for at least 3 or 4 hours. Obviously, he had not slept at all last night. Above all, what would he be a few days hence when the lashes his soul had received had passed from numbness to pain once more? She turned as a step sounded behind her.
"I beg your pardon, ma'am," said the discreet voice of Charlson, "but Sir Neville seemed unwell when I took up his hot water for dressing."
Subsection 6. At 10 o'clock that night, Neville turned to her and opened his eyes. Then he sat up, rubbing them. "Why, that's much better," he said. "Was that 10 which struck?" She had been with him for the last 2 hours. She had found him nearly speechless with pain when she had run up with Charlson. His face was ground down into the pillow. He was still in the suit in which he arrived. He had turned when she had spoken to him and said something about galloping horses, and she had thought him delirious until he had said that it was just one of his abominable headaches. The little village doctor had arrived 10 minutes later and had ordered him to bed. While Charlson was with him, she and the doctor had talked in the morning room, and she had told him that Sir Neville had had a very heavy shock in London. She did not at present specify more than this, and had probably not slept at all the night before. The doctor had nodded wisely, and talked about overstrained nerves. He had also asked her what the specialist had said a few months before, whom Neville, at his advice, had gone up to consult. Anna had said that she scarcely knew, that Sir Neville was very secretive about such matters and hated to have his health spoken of, but that she understood he had given the young man some medicine and told him first to avoid worry and next to come again. Again, the doctor had nodded 2 or 3 times and demanded to see the prescription. Anna fetched this from her own room and showed it to him. He had said nothing. Then, when the doctor had seen him again and departed, she had gone back and sat with the young man in silence, watching him, with Charlson sitting within call in the bathroom next door. She had given him his medicine once or twice in his soup when it came up, but nothing else had happened. She had heard the tick of the big hall clock behind and the chimes from the stable. That was all. Neville kept his face turned from her. Certainly, he looked more like himself now. His eyes were bright and restless, but the peculiar filmy look they had had this afternoon was gone again.
"Yes, that was 10, she said. "Your headache's gone?"
"Well, very nearly. Oh, yes, very nearly indeed. And I can see again all right. That was Mrs. Bessington, wasn't it? With you in the pavilion?" She did not show her surprise.
"Yes, I sent for her."
"I saw her from the window," said the young man, lying back again on his pillows. "Why aren't you dressed for dinner, Aunt Anna?"
"I shall have something presently," she said.
"And you've been with me all this time? What a beast I am!" "Aunt Anna."
"Yes?"
"I don't want to hear a single word of what she said. She's a good woman, but—" She waited. "It's finished. I know that. I didn't understand, you see, but—" Again he hesitated, and again she waited. She must just be perfectly steady, she knew that. What was that which Mr. Morpeth had said about not softening him? She must show no emotionalism. "Well, what I wanted to say was this. Do you think I've been such an offensive brute as all that? As she told me?" She clenched her teeth once. just to make certain that the muscles of her throat were under control. There seemed a strange, contracted kind of pain in them.
"No, my dear. You have not been an offensive brute at all. You've been all that is considerate and good. She doesn't understand, that is all."
"You really think that?"
"I am quite certain of it."
His eyes wandered vaguely round the room. The marks of his suffering were very plain on his face, even under that carefully shaded light. "Well, I'm glad you think that. I didn't mean to be, anyhow. By the way—"
"Yes?"
"I want to move into the west bedroom when it's convenient. I don't mean tonight, but in a day or two." In spite of her resolution, her heart sickened. But she crushed it down. She had conquered herself in that matter. Was she not to allow him to conquer too?
"Very well, my dear. The house is yours, you know."
He smiled and then grew grave again. "Oh, no, it is ours, really ours once more. It must remain ours now."
"My dear, you've talked enough. Do you think you can go to sleep now, if I leave you?"
"Oh, I dare say. Jim all right?"
"Jim's very much all right. He's been out nearly all day."
"That's first rate. We must bathe together again."
"My dear boy, you must go to sleep. Shall I call Charlson?"
"Yes, you may as well, if you don't mind. Then we'll begin again and try to do better. Won't we, Aunt Anna?" This time she could not speak. She stood up, leaned forward, and kissed him gently on his forehead, as her custom was. Certainly he was doing as Mr. Morpeth had thought he would. "Good night, Aunt Anna."
"Good night, my boy."